Hello friends, I'm here today to talk about tarot for beginners. Now there are a lot of tarot beginning series on YouTube, so I decided to focus on some things for my series that haven't been addressed as much. This first video will take a little bit of a look at decks, like how to buy a deck, what the structure of the deck is, but then we'll move on to other topics such as tarot and psychology, mindfulness as a tarot reader, and other things. So a little bit about me. I read tarot. My name is Rachel or Pluto. I go by either. Plutonium was my roller derby name, and I sort of borrowed it for my tarot online profile. So that's the moniker that I go by. You're welcome to call me Pluto, but my legal name is Rachel. I've been reading cards since about 2013. I started when I was in grad school as a way, I was actually really curious, and it was just another way for me to explore my internal world. I didn't read for other people for a very long time, maybe until about 2015 or so. But then when I started doing it, I realized that I really enjoy it. So in my regular life, I'm actually a psychotherapist, and I try to keep my tarot world and the mental health world fairly separate. At the same time, like, of course, my training in psychology absolutely informs the work that I do as a tarot reader. And so I take a really, I think, detailed stance when it comes to tarot and psychology, because I do have a lot of experience working in that way. And I'm very well trained in like psychological theory, psychodynamic theory, attachment theory, all kinds of stuff. I'd like to share what I've learned, what I'm interested in, what I'm passionate about with tarot. For beginning readers, I think that I was lucky to have some people around me who were very open to mentoring me and showing me the tricks of their trade, and so I want to pay it forward. So if you don't have one already, you'll want to go buy a deck. There are definitely traditions and myths out there about, you can't buy your own first deck. I would say that's not really true. I mean, if you feel really strongly that that's important to you, maybe wink, wink, nudge, nudge to a friend to have them go buy you a deck. Otherwise, I would say go buy your own. So I recommend that all beginners start with the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot deck. It's really wonderful because it uses so much imagery that it helps you to get a sense of the cards, of the traditions, of the meanings of the tarot cards. It's a really accessible deck. They're very cheap to get. You can get them almost anywhere, order it online, get it at a bookstore, and it's just kind of a foundational deck in the world of tarot. Now, there are a lot of different styles of tarot reading, philosophy, so there's like the Golden Dawn, there's Kabbalistic tarot, and I'm not going to get into all those different styles here. We're going to primarily focus on the Rider-Waite-based deck kind of stuff. Some other decks that I recommend for beginners are the Morgan Greer Tarot and the Aquarian Tarot. There are a lot of decks that are great for beginners, so the other advice I would give is find one that really speaks to you, and like if that imagery calls out to you, if it feels like something that draws you in, that's probably a good indicator that that might be a good deck for you. The tarot cards are broken up into two main categories. There's the major arcana and the minor arcana. The major arcana are the cards that have titles like the World or the Fool, and they take us through some really important archetypes in the human experience. So we see a development psychologically from the Fool all the way through to the World. The human learns about their ego, learns about themselves in relationship to the world, learns about their own immortality, about impermanence, all kinds of things, and it's this spiritual journey leading us to a sense of liberation. And so the different cards in the major arcana, if we string them all together, they actually tell a really awesome story. It's often called the Fool's Journey, and it shows basically like the journey of spiritual or psychological development. In a reading, these cards often mean something really important is trying to get your attention. So say that, the devil shows up, right? That's a very visually impactful image. And so when you see a major arcana card show up in a reading, it's important to give that a lot of attention. The major arcana also talks a lot about the divine masculine and the divine feminine. For instance, the Emperor is a card that often represents the divine masculine, whereas maybe the High Priestess might represent elements of the divine feminine, as would the Empress. And so even though I think in the past maybe there was a tendency to really stick to the gender binary within the cards, don't let that throw you off. It's really just about interpreting different elements of personality, elements of the psyche, and we can label it masculine or feminine, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with men or women specifically. A woman might really identify with the Emperor, a man might really identify with the High Priestess, right? Or it may not have anything to do with gender at all. So don't let that get you caught up. Another way that we can look at the major arcana is through a journey that moves from outward to inward. And so that's how some people divvy up the cards, from this outward journey of development, like who am I, what is the self, the lovers, like who am I in relationship to someone else. And then it turns inward. We have cards like the Hermit and the Hanged Man, where we start to introspect and contemplate our existence, contemplate our place in the world. And then we have this, this spiritual awakening, right? Things like the Judgment card or the World point us to a new perspective, a new way of being. Then we have the minor arcana. I think that it actually makes up most of the deck, right? There's only 22 major arcana cards. So ultimately you're going to spend a lot of your time working with the minor arcana. They're divided into 4 suites. So we have cups, pentacles, swords, and wands. And each of these different categories represents different elements, has different symbolism attached to it. Cups, for instance, is all about water and feelings and emotions. It's this very fluid, we might talk about feminine, passive, receptive kind of energy. We look at, the water that wears away the rock through just erosion over time. It's that kind of essence. The Pentacles is all about earth and stability. Swords is associated with the element of air, oftentimes associated with intellectualism, conflict, all kinds of fun stuff. And then Wands is like the firecracker, manic energy of the cards, and it's all about fire and dynamic movement, and it's a really fun energy to work with. So each of the 4 suits has an ace, and the aces are usually considered to be like the distillation of the energy of that suit. So like the Ace of Pentacles is like the essence of Pentacles energy. Then we move on, we have cards 2 through 10. Each of those cards in the Rider-Waite-Smith tell a story, whereas some decks just, will show 2 pentacles, right, and nothing else, or 3 wands. The Rider-Waite-Smith is nice because it actually gives you something to go off of intuitively as you look through the minor arcana. So after you get to card 10, then you get to the court cards. And these cards tend to stump a lot of people, but they're not as scary as they may seem. So you start with the Page, and then you have the Knight, and then the Queen, and the King. And different decks may call them different things. There might be a princess or a daughter or a son. Other decks have different names for things, but they all correspond to roughly the same archetypes, ideas, that kind of thing. And so each element has, kind of a different flavor to it. So, the Page of Wands has a really different feeling than, say, the Page of Swords. And it's important to get a feel for each, like for the cups, for the pentacles, for all of those when you're reading, so that you're not just like, oh yeah, what's that thing again? How is the Two of Pentacles different from the Two of Swords? I don't remember. Don't end up in that position, right? Get to know each element, get a feel for it, and that will help guide you in differentiating from the minor arcana cards. When I was new at tarot, I was on the hunt for good books that could help me better understand the tarot cards, and my favorite author when it comes to tarot is Rachel Pollack. And this is one of the main books that she has. It's called 78 Degrees of Wisdom, and it goes through each of the tarot cards, talks about historical meanings, current meanings, reversals, all kinds of different stuff. It helps you to better understand the Fool's Journey, that sequence of turning inward, from going outward to inward through the major arcana. It's really well done. So this book, like, I think every tarot reader should have. It's fantastic. Love it. Don't leave my house without it if I'm doing a reading. I mean, not literally, I don't like carry it around with me, but metaphorically, it's always there with me in my heart. So Rachel Pollack also wrote this book called Tarot Wisdom, and this book is awesome if you want to really delve into the history of tarot and to understand a little bit more about the different lineages. So like, what is the Golden Dawn interpretation of, the King of Pentacles as opposed to the Rider-Waite-Smith? And she goes really in depth and also talks a little bit about Kabbalistic tarot and like what the numbers are interpreted as with the Tree of Life. It gets pretty in depth. And so I also really like this book. It's quite heavy and large and will give you plenty of hours of enjoyable reading and learning. Something I like about Rachel Pollack is that she really looks at the tarot through this psycho-spiritual lens. So she explores tarot not just as a predictive tool, I'm not really a predictive tarot reader. I'm not like, oh, you're gonna meet the love of your life next Friday, what? No, that's not what I do. So looking at tarot from this archetypal, psychological, Jungian perspective and incorporating spirituality and finding meaning into that process as well. She really considers like, how do these cards, what spiritual symbolism do they have? How can we look at that and incorporate it into our readings rather than just staying on that mundane level? And there's nothing wrong with doing readings that have to do with mundane things, but I think that we're missing out if we only interpret the tarot cards as something that can help us make day-to-day decisions rather than allowing them to give us some deeper meanings when it comes to our spiritual lives. So for instance, let's take a card like the Lovers. So this is a card, right? Comes up. It's really easy, low-hanging fruit to just be like, oh, well, like, this is about your relationship, or this means that you're going to meet the love of your life. And it could mean that, right? Like, I'm not saying that those meanings are wrong or bad. But we can also look at the Lovers as a representation of the self, right? We have these different elements of ourself, perhaps our inner masculine elements, our inner feminine elements. It could be, a part of you that really enjoys ballet, but the other part of you, hates doing something feminine, right? Like, anytime there's conflict in the self, there's different elements that aren't playing nice together. The Lovers is a card that actually represents us looking at like, how can we create union? How can we create integration within the self? Not as like two different people, but like as us as one person, right? Like any tarot card can actually just represent different elements of the self coming together, having an experience, learning about each other, and finding a way to be at peace together. Another thing I like to do with the cards is look at the cards through a psychological lens. One of my favorite cards for this is the Ten of Swords. It's like the ultra dramatic, like, oh my God, like I'm dead kind of an energy, right? And we've all either been there or known someone that's had this energy where they're just like maybe a bit dramatic, and it's like that tendency to blow things out of proportion and always be the victim, right? We could look at something like borderline personality disorder, where someone is very internally intense in their emotional experience and really struggles to handle like rejection or difficult feelings. This card is really representative of that energy. And so whenever it shows up, I'm like, oh, I know you, like you tell a familiar story. And so we can look at cards as well through the lens of psychological theory, and I'll talk more about that later on in the series. We can also take the Death card, for instance. So this could mean literal death. In my experience, that's not what it means most of the time, just because hopefully people aren't dropping dead around you constantly. So death is also about transformation, right? It's about that moment where we put down our masks long enough for someone to know us, and it's like that dying of the ego, right? So we can take the cards in a literal fashion, and sometimes that's the right thing to do, and sometimes we also need to look at them in a symbolic fashion. Like, what do I need to let die in order to move on to the next phase of my life, for instance? Some cards tell us about the nature of reality. So the Wheel of Fortune, for instance, right? This is all about that impermanence, how we really just we want to be in control of stuff, but we're not, right? There's a spin of the wheel and we lose our jobs, or we get sick, or someone we love dies, or something really good happens, right? There's a lot of things in life that we don't have any control over. And learning to be okay with that, learning to accept that, is a process we have to do over and over and over and over again. And when this card comes up, it's that reminder of like, yeah, like I am not in control of most of this shit. The tarot can also show us about some of the really positive elements of humanity. One of my favorites for that is the Queen of Wands and the Rider-Waite. So she's here, you can see there's the sunflower, there's the black cat. She's this very beautiful open woman, like she's sitting in a very relaxed manner. And it's said that the black cat sort of symbolizes, that there's been difficulty in the past, right? And the sunflower is like the blossoming of the resilience of the Queen of Wands. And I love her, right? Because she's all over the place. She's done everything. She's been everywhere. And yet she's able to sit here in peace, being at peace with herself and be happy, right? She's glowing. She looks beautiful. And so to me, the Queen of Wands is a lot about like resilience through difficulty. One way to get to know your deck is to meditate on a card a day. A lot of people recommend this, and it's actually quite effective. So there's getting to know the deck in the intellectual sense, right? So that's books like Rachel Pollack's book, or the guidebook that comes with your tarot deck, where it talks about the meanings that other people have ascribed to cards. And then there's getting to know your deck in an intuitive fashion. And so that's all about sitting with your deck, getting to know the imagery, seeing what it brings up for you, right? Like all the tarot meanings have come up because an individual person or multiple people had an association when they saw that imagery. So the tarot cards are really intended to evoke, right, these archetypes, these like big themes that come up for humans and have for, millennia. And so, never doubt that like if you're experiencing something in relation to a card, right, like that's important. Don't dismiss it because it's not written in the handbook, right? Like you get to have your own lived experience with your deck, and that will absolutely make your readings much more personal and interesting for your clients. So I'd like to share a few of my favorite decks. I do love the Rider-Waite, and there are so many decks coming out all the time. It's hard to keep up, and I have a bit of a deck problem, as do many of us. So one deck that I really love is the Fountain Tarot. It was created fairly recently, and it comes in that handy little box and comes with a really lovely little booklet. I really love the descriptions in here. They find a way to be both really on point and actually pretty fresh, which is hard to do these days because the tarot has been talked about a lot. So the back of the deck looks like this, and then each of the cards is actually a little individual oil painting, and they are amazing. So I just adore this deck. Like, it just blows me away every time. I love working with it. Highly recommend it. It's gorgeous. So check out the Fountain Tarot if you're in the market. Another deck that most people have probably heard about at this point is called the Wild Unknown Tarot. So again, it's got that black and white lattice on the back, and then it's all animals, right? So there's no humans in this deck. It's all like symbols and animals, and it is also very, very lovely. It's got a way of being both very gentle and warm, but also will like, communicate some difficult truths as well. In the beginning, I mentioned the Aquarian Tarot as one that is good for beginners. It's a deck that's been around for decades. I want to say that it was actually created in the 60s or 70s. The back of it looks like this, and it's got kind of this watercolor, Art Deco style. It's a little less maybe emotionally expressive. A lot of the people, they don't necessarily like do a lot with their faces, but somehow this deck still manages to say a lot. I don't know what it is, but the artwork in here is really gorgeous. Not everyone responds to the Aquarian Tarot, but it seems like the people who do love it really love it. So if that speaks to you, maybe check it out. One of the reasons I love tarot is because it combines a couple of different interests for me. So it combines psychology and spirituality, and also art, right? And so to me, the visual, like, is having these cards, right, is a physical, a material representation of experiences that I'm having. And I love being able to see myself and my experience reflected in tarot cards. It's very satisfying to me. A lot of people find validation as they look at the cards and they see themselves reflected back. I think this is also why it's really important to have diversity in tarot decks so that all different kinds of people can see themselves reflected back in this imagery, and it doesn't just, kind of speak to one segment of the population. I'm grateful for the things that I've learned from the tarot. Tarot helps me to find clarity, it helps me to feel validated, it helps me to make some difficult decisions or to better understand myself or myself in the world. Whether you plan to read for yourself or other people, I think it's great to delve into the history of the tarot, to learn about what other people think about different cards, and to also really focus on your own intuitive response to each card. Have fun exploring tarot, and next time I'll be talking about tarot and psychology. Thank you and have a wonderful day.